The chandelier above the ballroom kept catching the light in a way that made everything look more expensive than it was. I remember staring up at it, counting the crystals, trying to slow my breathing. My father had just walked up to the microphone. My mother was already smiling that smile she used when she wanted people to think we were the kind of family that belonged in glossy magazines. And my sister, standing in her ivory Vera Wang, had her hand resting on her new husband's arm like she'd been practicing the pose for weeks. I should have known. The moment my father tapped the microphone twice and cleared his throat, I felt my stomach drop in a way it hadn't since I was a kid, waiting for him to ask about my report card. Some part of me, the part that had spent 31 years trying to earn a love that was never going to come, already knew what he was about to say. But let me back up, because if I just start at the ballroom, you won't understand why I didn't run. My name is Marlowe. I'm 31 years old. I live in a converted warehouse loft in the Pearl District of Portland, Oregon, and I built my entire life from the ground up while my parents pretended I didn't exist, except when they needed something. I'm the older daughter, the quiet one, the fixer. My younger sister, Soursey, is the pretty one, the easy one, the one my mother used to dress up like a doll for family Christmas cards while I sat in the back row with crooked bangs my dad cut himself because Mom said it wasn't worth paying a stylist for the kid no one would be looking at. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what kind of family I was dealing with when my father took that microphone. I left home at 17. Worked 2 jobs through community college, then 3 through state university. Slept in my car for 6 months when my landlord raised the rent and I didn't have the deposit for a new place. By 24, I had a master's degree in commercial real estate finance. By 27, I'd made partner at a development firm. By 29, I owned the loft outright, no mortgage. Just me, the deed, and a view of the Willamette River that took my breath away every morning when I made coffee. And in all those years, do you know how many times my parents called me? 11. I counted. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps records. Every one of those calls was about Cersei. Could I co-sign on her apartment in Brooklyn? Could I pay for her acting classes? Could I send a little something for her birthday since they were stretched thin this month? Stretched thin meant my dad had bought another vintage Porsche he'd never drive, and my mom had redone the kitchen for the 3rd time in 5 years. I sent the money, every time, because in some sick corner of my heart I kept thinking, this is the one. This is the time they'll finally see me. This is the gesture that buys their love. It never did. So when my mother called me 3 months ago and said Cersei was getting married and they wanted me to come home for the engagement party, I almost said no. I should have said no, but she did this thing where her voice got soft and a little shaky and she said, "Honey, your father isn't getting any younger. Family matters more than the past." And like an idiot, I bought a flight to Boston for the next weekend. That engagement party was where I should have seen it coming. My sister introduced me to her fiancé, a venture capitalist named Bennett, who shook my hand like he was already calculating my net worth. He had that practiced smile rich kids learn in prep school, the one that looks warm until you realize there's nothing behind the eyes. Ceres was glowing. My mother was glowing harder. My father pulled me aside on the back porch and told me, with a glass of bourbon in his hand in that gravelly voice he used for big proclamations, that the wedding was going to be the event of the season and that he needed to talk to me about contributions. I should have walked out then. I should have grabbed my purse and called a car and flown back to Portland and never picked up the phone again. But I didn't, because the daughter inside me, the 17-year-old who still wanted her dad to be proud, said, "Of course, whatever you need." Whatever you need. 3 words that turned out to be a leash they'd been waiting to yank. Over the next 8 weeks, I wrote checks for $47,000. The deposit on the venue, a private estate in the Berkshires. The florist, who specialized in something called monochromatic textural ivory installations. The wedding planner, a woman named Beatrix who wore $3,000 Loro Piana sweaters to every meeting and called my sister "darling girl" while she was billing me for her time. The dress, the alterations, the hair trial, the makeup trial, the rehearsal dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. The string quartet that my sister decided wasn't good enough, so she upgraded to a full chamber orchestra 2 weeks before the wedding, and I paid the difference. $47,000. And nobody, Not my mother, not my father, not my sister, not Bennett ever said thank you. They said things like, "We knew we could count on you, and it means so much to be doing this as a family." And once, when I gently mentioned that the chamber orchestra upgrade was a little outside my budget that month, my mother actually said, "Marlowe, please don't make this about money. Your sister only gets married once." I remember sitting on the floor of my loft after that phone call with my forehead pressed against the cool glass of my coffee table and just breathing. In and out, in and out. Because what I wanted to do was scream, and I knew if I started screaming I might never stop. I flew to Boston 3 days before the wedding. They put me up at the same hotel where the rehearsal dinner would be held, a renovated colonial inn with rooms that cost $600 a night, and a concierge who looked at me like I was lost when I checked in alone. My sister had a bridal suite the size of my entire apartment. I had a single room on the 3rd floor with a window that looked out over the parking lot. I unpacked my dress, a deep emerald silk I'd had made by a tailor in Portland. I unpacked my shoes, and then I unpacked the folder. The folder I want to tell you about now, because I want you to understand that I am not the kind of woman who walks into a wedding without a plan. About 6 weeks before the wedding, I'd started having a feeling. Not a thought, a feeling. The kind that lives in your chest and won't go away no matter how much chamomile tea you drink. My parents had been calling more often, asking strange questions. My mother wanted to know about my loft, what neighborhood, how many bedrooms, whether I'd had it appraised recently. My father asked me twice in 1 week if I'd ever considered diversifying my real estate holdings. The 3rd time my father asked about the loft, I called my attorney. Her name is Tessa Whitcomb, and she has been my lawyer since I bought my first investment property at 26. She's in her early 60s, wears reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and has a way of cutting through nonsense that I've envied my whole life. I told her everything. The phone calls, the questions, the feeling. The $47,000 I was hemorrhaging into my sister's wedding. Tessa listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Marlowe, I want you to come to my office tomorrow. Bring everything. Deed, title insurance, original purchase docs, your trust paperwork. Everything." I went the next morning. We sat in her office for 4 hours. And by the end of that meeting, my Pearl District loft was held in an irrevocable trust with a single beneficiary, me, and a clause I had not previously known existed. It's called an anti-coercion provision. It's a piece of legal language that essentially says any transfer of the property made under duress, manipulation, public pressure, or familial coercion can be challenged and reversed by the trustee, who in this case was Tessa herself. It also said that any attempt to compel such a transfer in writing or in public would constitute grounds for legal action against the person doing the compelling. She also pulled out something else. A small leather portfolio she said she'd been keeping for me for years, ever since I'd first walked into her office. Inside were copies of every check I had ever written to my parents, every co-signed lease, every birthday gift card, every Venmo transaction I'd ever sent to my sister. Tessa had been keeping records I didn't even know existed. She handed it to me and said, very quietly, "Just in case." I started crying, right there in her office. Because for the first time in my life, somebody who wasn't related to me by blood had decided I was worth protecting. That folder was what I unpacked in my hotel room 3 days before the wedding. I put it in the top drawer of the nightstand, under the Bible, and I told myself I probably wouldn't need it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself my family loved me in their own way, and they would never embarrass me in public. I was wrong about everything except the loving me part. That I'd been wrong about my whole life. Now let me take you back to the ballroom. The reception was held at an estate called Hawthorne Grove, a 1920s mansion in the Berkshires with a ballroom that had been featured in Architectural Digest. 211 guests, white and ivory everywhere. A 6-tier cake, a jazz ensemble during cocktails, the chamber orchestra during dinner, a DJ for later. My mother had spent the morning crying about how beautiful everything was, and my father had spent it shaking hands with men in suits who all seemed to know him from places I'd never been invited to. I sat at table 4, not the family table, table 4, with Bennett's cousins. The toast started during dessert. Bennett's father went first, then the maid of honor, then my mother. My mother's toast was a masterpiece of selective memory. She talked about how she'd raised her two beautiful daughters to value family above all. She talked about how proud she was that her girls had grown into such accomplished women. She did not mention me by name once. She gestured at me twice, vaguely, like I was a piece of furniture she was pointing out to a guest. And then my father took the microphone. He started the way he always started. A joke nobody laughed at, then a heavy sigh, then a long pause meant to communicate emotional depth. He talked about Cersei, about how she'd always been the light of the family, about how Bennett was the son he'd always wanted. Then he set his bourbon down on the podium and looked directly at me across the room. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about what kind of wedding gift to give my baby girl. Something meaningful, something that says, this is your future, this is the foundation of your new life." He paused. He smiled. He looked at me again, and I realized the answer was right in front of me the whole time. I knew. In that moment, I knew. My whole body went cold. "My older daughter, Marlowe," he said, gesturing at me with the kind of warm uncle smile that had fooled me for 31 years, "has been very blessed. She has done so well for herself. She owns a beautiful penthouse in Portland, Oregon, a property I am told is worth nearly $2 million. A murmur went through the ballroom. 211 faces turned toward me. And I know my daughter Marlowe. I know her heart. And I know that more than anything, she wants her sister to have the same start in life that she did. So tonight, in front of all of you, I am asking Marlowe to do something incredibly generous. To transfer the deed of her Portland penthouse to her sisters Cersei and Bennett as their wedding gift, as her gift to the family." The ballroom erupted in applause. You have to understand, they actually applauded. 211 people, most of whom I'd never met, clapped for my father as he asked me to give my home, the home I had bled for, slept in my car for, worked 3 jobs to afford, to my sister and a man I'd known for 4 months. They clapped as if they were watching a charity gala. My sister was crying, beautifully, of course beautifully, tears running down her perfectly contoured cheeks. My mother was clutching her chest. Bennett had his hand over his mouth like he was overwhelmed. I sat at table 4, and I felt something inside me, something that had been bending and bending and bending for 3 decades, finally snap. I didn't stand up. Not yet. I let the applause die down. I let my father say, "Marlowe, sweetheart, come on up here." I let the room turn its attention back to me, with every face waiting for me to weep with gratitude and float up to the microphone and hand my home away. Instead, I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. I set it down, and then I heard a chair scrape against the floor. A woman at table 2 had stood up. She was in her early 60s, silver hair in a sleek bob, wearing a midnight blue suit that I would later learn cost more than my father's car. I didn't recognize her at first. The hotel lighting was dim, and my eyes were swimming, and my whole body was vibrating with something I couldn't name. But then she stepped into the light, and I realized it was Tessa. Tessa Whitcomb, my lawyer, who I had not invited to the wedding, who I had not told was coming, who was, by every appearance, simply a guest among the 211, except that I knew in that instant she was not a guest at all. She walked, slowly and deliberately, to the center of the ballroom. She held a thin leather portfolio in her left hand. She looked at my father, and in a voice that carried clearly across the room without ever rising above conversational, she said, "Mr. Calloway, I would strongly advise you to put that microphone down." The room went still, the kind of still that has weight, the kind of still where you can hear ice melting in 211 glasses. My father stared at her. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "My name is Tessa Whitcomb. I am your daughter Marlowe's attorney. I am also the trustee of the irrevocable trust that holds the title to her Portland property. The transfer you just announced on behalf of my client and without her consent is not legally possible, and what you have just done in front of 211 witnesses constitutes attempted coercion of a beneficiary under written contract, which I should mention is actionable in the state of Massachusetts. My mother stood up so fast she knocked her chair backward. "Excuse me, this is a private family matter." "Ma'am," Tessa said, without even looking at her, "you stopped being a private family the moment your husband put it on a microphone." Somebody at table 6 let out a small, involuntary laugh. My father's face had gone the color of old wax. He looked at me. For the first time in maybe 10 years, he actually looked at me. Not at the daughter he could use, but at me. And I saw something pass behind his eyes that might have been fear. "Marlowe," he said into the microphone, his voice now soft and pleading. "Honey, this is a misunderstanding. I think you've taken this the wrong way. I was just making a suggestion." I stood up. "I want you to picture this because I want you to know exactly what kind of woman I am now." I stood up in my emerald silk dress. I did not shake. I did not cry. I walked in heels across the ballroom floor, past table after table of people who had clapped for my disinheritance 2 minutes earlier, and I took the microphone out of my father's hand. He let me take it. He didn't even try to hold on. I looked out at the room. I looked at my mother, who had collapsed back into her chair and was making a sound somewhere between a moan and a hiss. I looked at my sister, whose tears had dried very suddenly, and whose hand was clenched so tight around her bouquet that one of the white roses had broken in half. I looked at Bennett, who was no longer doing the overwhelmed hand-over-mouth thing and was instead doing a very calculating, very narrow-eyed thing that told me everything I needed to know about why he'd really proposed. And then I spoke. "My name is Marlowe Calloway. I am the older daughter of the man who just tried to give away my home in front of all of you. I want to make a few things clear so there are no misunderstandings." I held up the leather portfolio Tessa had handed me as she passed. I'd taken it from her without breaking stride. "This folder contains every check I have ever written to my parents. It contains every co-signed lease for my sister. It contains the receipts for the $47,000 I personally paid for this wedding, the flowers, the venue, the dress my sister is wearing, the orchestra she demanded 2 weeks ago. All of it, funded by the daughter you all just watched my father try to humiliate." The silence in the room had become something physical. I could feel 211 people leaning forward. "My penthouse in Portland is held in an irrevocable trust. It cannot be transferred, not to my sister, not to anyone. The clause that protects it is called an anti-coercion provision, and it exists specifically because I anticipated that this moment, or one very much like it, was going to happen." My father made a small sound. I didn't look at him. I left home at 17. I put myself through school. I bought that home with money I earned, sleeping in my car when I had to, working until I was bleeding from my hands when I had to. Nobody in my family helped me. Nobody in my family called to check on me. The only times my parents reached out, in 14 years, was to ask for money for my sister. I turned then, and I looked at Sauersay directly. She would not meet my eyes. "I am not a bank. I am not a piggy bank you can break open when you need money. I am a person. I am your daughter. I am your sister, and I have spent my entire life paying for the privilege of being treated like a stranger by my own family." I set the microphone down on the podium, very gently, like I was placing a piece of crystal. Then I picked it up again, because I wasn't quite done. "I won't be paying for anything else after tonight. I won't be co-signing anything. I won't be answering the phone. The trust is locked. The portfolio is with my attorney. And if anyone in this family attempts to pressure me, in public or in private, into any further financial obligation, my attorney has been instructed to pursue every legal remedy available." I paused. "Enjoy the rest of the wedding." I set the microphone down for the second time, and I walked, in those emerald heels, all the way across the ballroom floor, past my white-faced mother, past my crying for real this time sister, past Bennett, who was now staring at his shoes, and past Tessa, who gave me the smallest nod a person can give. I made it to my hotel room before I started shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed in my emerald dress, and I shook for a long time. Not crying, just shaking, the way your body shakes when it's been holding something in for so long that letting it out feels like an earthquake. My phone started ringing at some point. I turned it off. There was a knock at my door around 11. I didn't answer. I heard my mother's voice. Marlowe, Marlowe, please, open this door. We need to talk as a family. I didn't move. I heard my father after that, lower voice. Calmer. The voice he used when he was trying to negotiate. Sweetheart, you've made your point. We all said things we didn't mean. Just open the door. I didn't move. Sarirsa came last, around midnight. I could tell it was her because she was sobbing in that performative way she'd been perfecting since she was 6. Marlowe, you ruined my wedding. You ruined my wedding. How could you do this to me on my wedding night? I didn't move. Around 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps walking away. Real footsteps, the kind that don't come back. I sat on the edge of that bed until the sun came up. And then I packed my bag. I left the emerald dress hanging in the closet because I never wanted to see it again. I checked out at 6 in the morning. The concierge tried to tell me there was a message from a Mrs. Calloway. I told him to recycle it. I flew home that morning. I sat in the window seat of a 6:55 American Airlines flight from Logan to PDX, and somewhere over Wyoming, watching the prairie roll out below me like a wrinkled gold blanket, I started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that means anything is funny. The kind that means something is finally let go. I want to tell you what happened after, because I know you're wondering. The video went viral within 48 hours. Somebody at table 9 had been recording my father's speech, and when Tessa stood up, they kept recording. The clip ended up on 3 different platforms before the weekend was out. By the time I landed in Portland, 6.5 million people had watched my father try to give away my home, and my attorney shut him down. By the end of the week, that number was 23 million. I didn't post the video. I didn't have to. Bennett's family, who are the kind of people who care very deeply about reputation, ended the marriage within 10 days. He had it annulled before the honeymoon photos were even uploaded. Circe moved back in with my parents. I'm told she's been telling people I drugged her wedding cake. I don't know if anyone believes her. My mother sent me a letter, handwritten, 12 pages long, full of underlined words and accusations, and a single sentence at the end that said, "We never thought you would do this to your family." I burned it on the small balcony of my loft, watching the smoke drift out over the Willamette River. My father had a small heart attack 3 months later, not life-threatening. The kind of heart attack that scares a man into wanting to repair what he broke. He called me from the hospital. I let it go to voicemail. I have not listened to it. I don't say any of this to be cruel. I say it because for the first time in my life, I am no longer measuring my worth in dollars I can send. I am no longer auditioning for love that was never going to be offered. There's a photograph on my refrigerator. It's of my grandmother on my mother's side, a woman I barely knew because my mother kept her at arm's length until she died when I was 14. In the photograph, she's sitting at her kitchen table in Vermont with her hands folded around a coffee mug, and there's a note in her handwriting on the back. I found it in a box of her things that nobody else wanted, in my mother's attic when I was 22. It says, "Marlowe, sweet girl, whatever they say you owe them, you don't. The only person you owe is the woman you're becoming. Sign your name, hold your ground, be your own home." I read that note every morning while I drink my coffee. I am my own home. The penthouse is just a building. The home is in the woman who walked across that ballroom and took the microphone. I am 31 years old. I have not spoken to my parents in 8 months. I have not spoken to my sister in 8 months and 12 days. I have not been happier in my entire life. If you are watching this, and you are the daughter who has been paying for a love that never comes, I want you to hear me. You are not a bank. You are not a stepping stone. You are not the price of admission to a family that doesn't see you. You are a person. You are allowed to keep what is yours. You are allowed to sign your name on a deed and never sign it off. You are allowed to walk across a ballroom in emerald silk and take the microphone out of your father's hand. And you are allowed, when the door is finally closed and the phone is finally off and the smoke from the burning letter has finally drifted out across the river, to look at the woman in the mirror and say, out loud, the words that took me 31 years to find, "I am enough. I always was." I think about that ballroom sometimes when I'm making coffee in the mornings. The chandelier. The 211 faces turning toward me. the sound of my own heels on the marble as I walked across the floor to take that microphone out of my father's hand. And I think about how long it took me to learn what I learned that night and how much it cost me to learn it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. When you spend your life paying for the love of people who treat you like a stranger, you are not buying love. You are buying time. You are buying one more month before they ask again. You are buying the silence between phone calls. And the price keeps going up because that is the nature of a debt that was never real to begin with. My father did not raise a daughter, he raised a resource. And the moment I stopped being useful, the moment I held my ground in front of 211 witnesses, he treated me like a stranger too, because that is what I had always been to him. There is a cause and effect to everything we tolerate. Every check I wrote my parents was a vote for the version of myself that did not deserve a seat at the family table. Every time I co-signed a lease for Sarcy, I was teaching her that my labor was free. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I was building the ballroom my father would eventually drag me into. The microphone in his hand that night was not an accident. It was the natural conclusion of 3 decades of my own silence. What broke that pattern was not anger. Anger had been with me my whole life, and it had never saved me. What broke it was preparation. The 4 hours I spent in Tessa's office, the portfolio she kept for me without being asked, the clause she wrote into a trust I did not yet know I needed. Wisdom, I have come to believe, is not the same thing as feeling. Wisdom is what you do 6 weeks before the wedding, when your chest tells you something is wrong, and you decide to listen to your chest instead of arguing with it. And strength. I used to think strength was loud. I thought it looked like screaming back, like slamming doors, like making scenes. I was wrong. Strength was sitting at table 4 and finishing my water. Strength was setting the microphone down gently. Strength was checking out of that hotel at 6 in the morning and not listening to the voicemail my father left me from a hospital bed 3 months later. Real strength is quiet, and it does not need to be witnessed to be real. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it is this. You are allowed to keep what is yours. You are allowed to be the home you have been building for somebody else your whole life. The love you have been paying for was never on sale. But the woman you are becoming, the one who reads this and recognizes herself in it, she is already worth more than anything they ever asked you to give away.